When John Oliver spoke about the problem, he actually talked about this in terms of the NCAA and March Madness, right? So he tells us about this huge draw that basketball has and that college sports have in general. Then he started talking about the players who play the game, and for all the money that's generated during March Madness and the other times that these college games play, the students are not the benefactors of all of that revenue. So that's how he framed the problem that he was going to address about the NCAA and the student athletes. Likewise, you'd have to figure out how you're going to state the problem and how you're going to frame the issue. Whatever your topic is will need to be framed in that way so that people can see that not only is there a topic that you'd like to discuss, but there's a very pressing reason for us to have this conversation and therefore the research about this topic. The next thing that you'll do after you give the clear statement of the problem is that you will talk about the purpose of the study. This is basically your answering the question, why am I going to do this? What is the reason for doing this study? Perhaps if you were talking about leukemia and the causes of leukemia, you wanted to talk about it because you needed to, let's say, inform more parents about getting their children tested for the gene that actually causes leukemia. Maybe the reason why you feel this research is important is because you want to talk about some of the cutting edge cures or treatments for leukemia that haven't been talked about before. Whatever the purpose is, you need to identify why you're actually doing the research. You're not just doing it because you want to know about this. You want to say that you're doing this research for a larger issue, to solve a larger problem. The next thing you would do after talking about the purpose of the study is to make sure that if there are any definitions that people wouldn't understand as you go through and talk about the rest of your research, that you make sure those definitions are addressed. So, there are all kinds of different cancers. Maybe you need to talk about leukemia as being a blood disease. It's a blood cancer, blood and bone marrow cancer. So maybe you need to give a definition for leukemia. Or maybe one of the treatments, the lavender treatment, is one of the chemotherapies for leukemia. Maybe you'd need to give a definition for the lavender treatment so that people would understand what the lavender treatment is. So when you're considering your topic, you also need to consider there might be some words, some phrases, some names of things that people wouldn't readily understand, and you need to make sure you define those things in your proposal. The next thing you'd want to cover is the significance of the investigation. So not just why am I doing it, but why is this important? That's what the significance means. Normally in this section of a proposal, people will talk about the number of harms that they find. For instance, let's say I was going to do something about Ferguson, Missouri, and police brutality or criminal injustice that's been enacted by the justice system. And so if I want to explain to people what's the significance of my even doing this investigation, I might want to tell them that places like Ferguson, Missouri are 2/3 African American in the city. Maybe the majority of the residents are African American, but they are underrepresented when it comes to the government. Practically none of them are represented on the police force. There's maybe one person represented on the police force. And then I'd show the significance by saying, so you have a city that's primarily one race that's being governed by a different race, so those racial tensions will be heightened. Well, that's a significant thing, so I can talk about it in those terms. Another way you can express significance when you're doing investigation or research questions is that you can say, 88% of the residents in Ferguson were stopped and given a ticket or a fine. 97% of them have bench warrants that are out because they couldn't pay the tickets and the fines. So those percentages help people see what the numbers are about this problem. And usually the percentages can be pretty convincing in letting people know that further research is definitely warranted based on what this person is saying. So that's what the significance is for. How bad is it is basically the question you're going to answer. The next section then would be your literature review. And as we've said before, the literature review is a lot like the synthesis paper that you've done in the past. And so the literature review would be your collection of sources. And it's yours answering the question, what was the conversation before I decided to do the research? And so you would find some sources from experts and scholars that talk about your topic in kind of the same way you're discussing the topic. So not just Ferguson, Missouri, because you could talk about anything in Ferguson, Missouri, like the kinds of plants that are grown in Ferguson. So you want to talk about the relevant topic of criminal justice, the criminal justice system, and Ferguson, Missouri. How many people have discussed that? You could also talk about criminal justice in general and find what sources say about criminal justice in medium-sized urban areas in the country. But you'll need to have some kind of previous discussion from your sources, and all of that information would come together in your literature review. The next section you would have is actually your hypothesis or your working thesis. So this is the argument you kind of have right now. This is the opinion you kind of have about this issue right now. And you know that this opinion will probably change as you do your research. The other thing that will accompany the opinion will be questions, the kinds of questions that you want to answer in order to find out how you're going to support your hypothesis or how you're going to negate your hypothesis, because you might find information that supports your opinion, but you will probably also find information that will go against or negate your opinion. So you'll need to have a list of questions to help you find out more information about your topic and test your thesis to see if your thesis is a strong one that can hold up or that can't be defended. Again, one of the most important things that you'll need to do is to write good questions and write good theses that you can test. Because you're writing an argument-based research paper, you know that in the end you're going to have to make an argument, which means you should test that argument as much as possible before you start communicating that to someone else, which means your questions are going to be very, very important. And if you don't already know, a research question is a question that proposes a relationship between two or more variables. So in an ideal world, what would our justice system look like compared to the justice system that we have right now? And all kinds of questions can come out of that one. So here are some things to remember. There are different kinds of research questions, and the more variety you have in the types of questions you're asking, the better your research will probably be, the better your answers will be as you go to find those answers, which means in the end when you're writing your paper, the better your paper will probably be because you have a rich base of questions that you've developed. So here are some of the different kinds of research questions. The first one would be a descriptive research question. These questions seek to identify and describe. So if you're asking these types of questions, you're trying to get a better idea of what, let's say, the criminal justice system in Ferguson, Missouri is like, right? So you're trying to identify and describe the problems that are happening in the city of Missouri concerning its criminal justice system. So you might ask things like, What is the ethnic breakdown of the city? How many police officers do they have? What kind of history does the police officers and the communities through the years have in Ferguson, Missouri? Those kinds of things will give us all a better idea of what the state of that city is so that we can understand the depth of the problems that are there. Another type of question would be a differences research question. And these questions ask if there are differences between groups concerning some phenomenon. So if you're doing research on Ferguson, Missouri, you might ask, what is the experience of a poor person in the city of Missouri as opposed to a rich person who gets, let's say, a speeding ticket? Are there any differences in their experiences going through the justice system as they are paying the fine? Or can they pay the fine? What happens between these two groups? Are there any similarities between the two groups? That's also something that you'd want to know. Because maybe the treatment is the same and you'll get to answer that question and by saying, no, the treatment is actually the same. So you're looking for any types of comparisons that you can make between groups concerning the issue that you're trying to research. A relationship question asks if there are two or more phenomena that are related in some way. So if the number of tickets increased between October and December in Ferguson, Missouri, does that coincide with an email that the captain of the police force sent to the officers? For instance, did some piece of information actually say we need to increase our fines, our tickets over Christmas season because we'll need to have some money? So you're trying to figure out if there are any relationships between one act and another act within the system, within the problem that you're looking at. So those are the kinds of questions that you can ask. And you'll want to have some sort of variety of questions in each of these areas in order to get a nice, rich list of questions to answer.